Hello and welcome to the Corporate Facility Council's first Wednesday webinar, Future-Proofing Your Wayfinding and Signage System, Critical Approaches for Developing Signage Program. Sorry, I messed that up. Future-Proofing Your Next Wayfinding and Signage System, Critical Approaches for Developing Signage. As presented by Dixon Kaiser and Kevin Wilhelm with the GNU Group. I do want to let everyone know that they have been muted for audio quality. If you do have any questions at any time during the webinar, please type them into the question box on your control panel, and we will go over them during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. I do also want to let you know that this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the CFC's website, ifmacfc.org. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Wayne, the CFC Secretary and Programs Chair. Wayne, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Joshua. As always, thank you for your wonderful assistance in these webinars. It's much appreciated as always. I'm excited about this presentation. It's kind of whetting our appetite for everybody returning to occupancy, especially in some of the states that still have some closures. And wayfinding now has a new meaning besides just getting people to conference room A. We've got some important stuff here. But what I'm excited about our two speakers, Dixon and Kevin, about is, you know me, I've always had this description here of the gulf between architecture and design and O&M, and I always try to give content here at the CFC to our FMs to get them a seat at that table, or at least let them know what they should be asking to participate in that, instead of having everything forced on them and then saying, now you guys maintain it. So I'm excited to hear what the guys have. I will say GNU is part of Impact Group, which is a company out here in the Bay Area, and that company, their leadership team is led by Rafi Esperado, who is a wonderful partner for IFMA, especially in the IFMA Silicon Valley chapter, and great guy, very talented person, but has a big heart also. So it's one of those leaders I admire. But the whole great team over there. So please, if you need any questions answered, type them in the chat window. These guys will help you out. If not, you can always get in touch with them after. We will be sending out contact information for them afterwards. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to you guys. Dixon and Kevin, take it over.
Great. Thank you, Joshua. Thank you, Wayne, for the introduction. And we're excited to be here today and really to talk about future-proofing your next wayfinding and signage system. And as Wayne said, one of the challenges with wayfinding and signage systems, we're typically working with branding teams, with marketing teams, workplace experience teams, but oftentimes facilities management is left out of that conversation. And you've got a very critical role in really managing and maintaining the system moving forward. And if we can bring you to get you a seat at the table early on in that process, it's going to lead to a better life cycle for those signage systems and some of the challenges and changes that come along the way. It's especially critical right now with return to office strategy. One of the things that has changed, it's a little bit of a silver lining with some of the challenges we've had over this past year, is I think facilities management, operations, employee health and safety are starting to be brought into this conversation much sooner as we start looking at hybrid workplace. What are the changes that are going to be happening to that built environment? And so our goal today is to really kind of walk you through what we, as an experiential design firm, our process that we go through to be able to develop some of those signage systems. And whether you're developing a new wayfinding and signage system, or you need to augment what you currently have based off of your return to office strategy, our goal today is to educate you on that process. And really the key to that future proofing is all the strategy and the thinking that goes into the very, very beginning stages of that. That is your foundation for success moving forward. So we'll walk through that process a little bit, give you some considerations to be thinking about with your return to office strategy, and then kind of talk about some key design concepts as well, challenges that you may be facing and how you can handle that and address that through design. So we're pretty tight on some timing today, so we're going to just jump straight into this. So let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm going to turn my video off just to make sure I've got the best connection possible here. hold on a second. All right, perfect. So everybody should be seeing that right now. And
you can see it.
Really the first step here is getting into, critical design approaches. So this is our key foundational process. It's our tried and true method that we go through in developing wayfinding and signage programs from start to finish. We not only plan, we design, we help implement these. And it's this critical foundation that we go through that we want to walk you through today. This is just a high level overview. We'll dig into each of those just one step at a time. So step one, in developing this overall plan for your wayfinding and signage program is to just audit your existing space. This is really a deep dive into just taking a look at your existing space and taking some key observations and just really understanding how do users really use that space. So first step is to go through and identify circulation. How are people really interacting with your environment? And that starts with arrival on campus. What are the key entry points? So understanding those, that's especially critical as you get back into return to office. You may have a facility, maybe it's a multi-building campus, and there's 4 or 5 key entry points to your building. Maybe that's changing. Maybe you've got a touchless check-in process where you're starting to funnel traffic through the main lobby now. So taking a look at the circulation is key. Usage, how are people starting to use the space? What are your different, how do you break out your space? Whether it's you've got some benching, you've got some hoteling options in there, you've got conference rooms, collaboration rooms, administrative offices. Really breaking that out and understanding what are all the key amenities, how are people using those, and then taking a look at your existing sign types that you have in place. And that's everything from branding, whether it might be some environmental graphics that are up on the wall, lobby logo signs, getting into wayfinding signage. How do you easily get from point A to point B? Jumping into identification, whether that's conference room identification, office identification, and then even getting into the regulatory signs, whether that's health, safety, fire life safety, getting into restroom signage, all those different types of components. So just taking a full audit of everything that you have existing. So not just the overall signs themselves, but really getting into how users are interacting with that space. And then even taking a look at the messaging of your existing system. Maybe some conference rooms names have changed. Maybe you're not calling them conference rooms anymore. Maybe you're calling them collaboration rooms. So taking a look at the structure of how you're referring to your key amenities on campus, and really just taking a deep dive into that, because you may be wanting to adjust some of those as you reintroduce a new signage system in place. A key part of that is understanding the user journeys. One of the things that we do at New Group is we really focus on that human-centric approach to these systems. So it's really key to understand what is that user experience from arrival all the way through their journey to their end destination, whether that might be a conference room, whether that might be their desk, getting them into different key amenities. So it's understanding that start to finish, but understanding who are all of your users as well. It may not always be employees. You may have visitors and guests. Their journey might be different from an actual employee. You may have key executives coming into an executive briefing room. What's their user experience like as they arrive? So it's critical to understand each of those users and how you get from point A to point B along the way, and what are the key decision points that need to be made as well. Just to share a little bit of tools of the trade that we use, I want to talk about some key auditing tools that if you need to start doing this on your own as a facilities management team, there's some great cloud-based tools out there. Wayfind It, PlanGrid, SignAgent is our preference that we're starting to get starting to implement with many of our clients right now. Great tool to be able to take pictures and inventory your existing systems, so you've got an easy reference. And as you change it out, it allows you to be able to show before and after as well. So great tools. We'll have our contact information at the end if there's follow-up questions. Glad to answer any of those. But some key return to office considerations you need to be thinking about too is what are the shifts that have occurred in your built environment? Like we talked about, what's that lobby check-in experience has maybe changed? Maybe over the course of COVID, as you're bringing people back, some amenities have closed down, some amenities have shifted, and even taking a look at conference room capacities, some of those things maybe as well. So understanding what are some of the shifts and how do you maybe potentially address that in signage, and then behavioral changes. So everybody's coming back to the office. It's not going to be the same normal. It's going to be a new normal or a next normal. And what can you do from a facilities management standpoint to help influence that behavior, whether it's redirecting them to new entry points, new exit points, reinforcing sanitation, social distance, all those different types of components. And that really is working with the rest of the team to be able to understand what are the behaviors we want to reinforce with that. Jumping into step 2 is really analyzing your existing challenges. So once you've gone through, completed a whole audit, it's taken a step back from that and looking at, some key challenges. Maybe there's some wayfinding challenges. Certainly return to office is going to create some new wayfinding challenges that you'll need to address. Again, looking at information and language, how do we refer to specific amenities, specific facilities? Do we need to maybe change the way we talk about that so there's a common language that's used? And that may vary between different facilities and locations that you have as well. So trying to create some consistency and some standards in place. Taking a look at ADA compliance, looking at all of your systems. Do you need to address things a little bit differently? Are you shifting to, all gender restrooms and you need some new signage in there? Are your ADA compliant signs in the right position? Are they in the right location, mounting height? Taking a look at fire life safety. Do you have all those correctly identified in signage? And then even taking a look at a step back from a maintenance. And this is where I think it's key to get some frontline experience and some frontline observation. You'd be surprised if you took a step back and just asked a facilities team, which I'm sure you're very well aware of what some of the key challenges are with your signage program. But even talking to the front desk team, when people are coming up asking questions, how do I get from here to here? And if they're seeming to get lost, those are some key critical questions to be able to ask, because you can address that in signage, which helps with reducing maybe some load on those front desk teams. And just some key return to office considerations. I think one of the challenges that we all had when COVID, first hit last year was there was this knee-jerk response. We need to throw a lot of signage at it. We need to, really focus on employee health and safety, social distancing, sanitation. It's taking a look at some of those things and figuring out what's going to be more permanent in your return to office strategy and what are going to be more temporary. How can we address it temporarily that maybe later on it's going to start to move away? And part of that is looking at how is your phasing. And we saw this a lot last year where we clamped down, things started to open up, and then we had to kind of clamp down again with certain county or state restrictions. You may have some of those same phasing considerations that you need to handle within your own corporate environment. So what are the things to do that you need to be able to have in place right as people come back? And then what are the things that will phase out over time? But if conditions shift again, what do you need to do to bring that back into place? So taking a look at, some of those things, what needs to be temporary, what needs to be permanent, I think is going to be really key for everybody. And then step 3 in our process is really identifying the internal stakeholders. Of course, I'm talking to IFMA. I'm going to put facilities and operations at the top of that list. That is a key critical component. Rather than designing and just, building out an entire system and then just turning over the keys to your teams, it's critical to be able to have you up front in those discussions. We're starting to see that more and more. Brand and marketing is critically important as well. So implement a whole signage program that is maybe not on brand, and then you're going to start to have to redo some of those things. Making sure employee health and safety is part of that conversation. They're a critical component of that, especially with the return to office strategy. And then even looking at some of those external stakeholders as well, property managers and landlords. What are the ownership groups? They've got a key stake in it too, because you may need to get certain considerations taken into place. And that, I think, is critically important in the return to office considerations. Is if you're in a multi-tenant building or you're in a building that you're leasing, what are the changes that you can implement within your lease? There may be some restrictions within that lease. Talking to your landlord and understanding what is the landlord responsible for versus what are you responsible for. We're seeing that, with some of our clients that are in a multi-tenant building. They may have a few key floors. There's a whole part of that user journey that they can't control. So understanding what is going to be the landlord's responsibility, what are they going to do, what aren't they going to do that you need to take into consideration. There might be some things that you want to start to introduce in there. So it's key having them a part of that conversation up front. Step 4 would be identifying any external partners that you need to have in place, whether it's an experiential design firm like New Group or other design groups, who's going to be fabricating your sign system, making sure that, one, they're engaged in that process, and two, they're going to be there long term for any future updates as well. You may have some architects as a part of your external team as well. A good majority of the time, we're working directly with architects and implementing systems, especially in new construction. You may have some digital sign systems in place as well. We typically partner with best in breed in terms of how that gets implemented. So understanding who's your digital provider that's going to be a part of that, and then what IT infrastructure is going to be in place. So understanding, especially with return to office, as you're implementing some of these, either a new system or changes to your existing system, what are those internal resources that you have at your disposal? A lot of times, with some of the clients that we've dealt with, nobody had a line item in their budget for a pandemic response. So everybody's getting a little scrappy, trying to figure out what they can do on their own. So it's critical to understand what are the things that you have available, what are the resources you have available, and then understanding what are the gaps. So what are the things that you may need help and assistance with the implementation side of that. And then jumping into step 5 is it's really developing a roadmap. So taking what you've learned from, the initial audit, identifying your overall challenges, how are we going to address that, taking into key considerations from your internal stakeholders as well as your external partners. And you really compile all those elements together into your roadmap. And that's taking a look at what are all the signs that are going to be needed in place, your sign type hierarchy, making sure you have identified branding signage that needs to be in place, wayfinding signage, identification and regulatory signs. I think a key consideration with the return to office strategy as well is don't neglect that branding component. And we're not talking about making sure you've got a logo on the wall, but how can you help create an environment where there's a level of employee engagement? Making sure that whatever signs you're implementing in your return to office strategy really fold into that overall brand. Nobody wants to come back to an environment that feels like it's a pandemic hazard zone. You don't want, all these kind of loud, bright signs everywhere. Sometimes you do from a health and safety standpoint, but people want to feel safe and welcome back into that environment. So those are some key things to consider. Really mapping out all of your signage locations, understanding what materials are these things going to be built out of. For some clients where you have LEED certified buildings, there's certain materials that can qualify for additional LEED points, sustainable materials out there. But it's critically important to understand from a material standpoint, How is it going to be managed, maintained? How's it going to be cleaned down the road as well? So understanding those things up front and making those key decisions will help with the overall life cycle of those. And one of the things that we really focus on, in our process up front is identify your budgets up front. The last thing you want to do before you start going down the road of design and implementing these things is you need to have that budget conversation up front, because some key decisions that are made up front, somebody might buy into and love a design and say, we absolutely have to have that. You start multiplying that out, over the hundreds of signs that you may need on it, and you may have your budget blown by the end. So making sure you understand budgets up front, what's it going to take to be able to implement those is really critical. And, just return to office considerations. How is that return to office signage going to be maintained? So when you start putting in some temporary signage, is it facilities that's going to manage that? Is it the individual department that's going to manage that? What's the process for reporting, any kind of damage to some of those temporary signs or new signs that are going in? Making sure there's critical communication channels in place there. And then really what signs require that flexibility. One of the big things that we talk about in our programs is making sure you've got flexibility in place. So if you need to change out messaging, we've seen this over this past year. Is it COVID? Is it COVID-19? Are we talking about return to work, return to office? Are you welcoming guests? Are you welcoming employees? You may want the ability to be able to have some flexibility in your programs. Even with, sign inserts. Sign inserts can always be a challenge. How do you maintain that? How do you keep it on brand? There's software solutions in place out there that can be able to help truly with some of those components. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dixon Kaiser, who's our principal and director of design, to, as we've talked about the overall process, now we start jumping into the design side of it. And so what are some key challenges that you might be facing out there, and then how can we solve that from a design perspective? So Dixon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Kevin, and hopefully my audio will stay consistent and clean here. So yeah, one of the things that obviously everyone, this has been a challenging year. Haven't run into a client that hasn't communicated that. But I think a lot of people are kind of, flipping their perspective now and saying, hey, yes, it's been a challenging year, but it's also an opportunity, an ability to create some opportunities, especially as it relates to what we always kind of say is curating that experience for all of your campuses, facilities, and what have you. And that's the experience for, as Kevin alluded to, not only your employees, but visitors and what have you. And there's really kind of four areas that were important pre-COVID and that are especially important now. And so as we get into this next, Kevin, so when we think about sense of arrival, this is a really important aspect of the experience, and that is the ability for visitors. Kevin, I don't know if the slides are prompting. The exterior experience, so the arrival onto campuses. We all know that we're all pretty much finding our ways through cell phones and what have you. So balancing that out of, addressing and brand awareness. So next, and that then moving into the interior experience as well, making sure that people understand, feel, pretty good lag on these slides here. Welcoming that sense of experience, and next, not only reinforcing brand, but also, and then next, as Kevin alluded to, there's the need to begin to start changing behavior and being able to reinforce new behaviors, what have you, welcoming guests, new check-in protocols and what have you. And this is a program that we actually worked on with McAfee, their new headquarters, just completed signage, environmental graphics, and then COVID hit. So we worked really closely with a broad range of folks from workplace, facilities, what have you, to really understand what was going to be needed for, again, visitors, employees coming back to the office. Also, some pre-arrival information. We're developing, kind of a little custom welcome back brochure that kind of not only reorients everyone to this new headquarters, but also to the surrounding region and what have you. So next. We work with a lot of companies that have large campuses, traditional, consolidated, as well as unconsolidated. And I would say the key in really making sure that your campuses are easy to navigate is consistency and simplicity. So next. Again, previous slide was Broadcom, but again, simplicity of addressing information, very important. In this particular case here, Rosewood Commons, this was a old traditional consolidated campus. I think it was former AT&T. It was really actually based off of addressing. We talked about how there were a lot of wayfinding issues with the client. And so we ended up developing a very, once again, simple and easy to follow wayfinding strategy in identifying their buildings numerically. So next. And then reinforcing that at building entries. With super graphics, building monuments that could also integrate tenant identification as well. So it's this idea of really making that consistency not only in language, but also graphics and information as well. Next. So if that's a traditional consolidated campus, recently having worked with Workday, which will pop up here in a second, this is a great example of what I'd kind of refer to as more of an unconsolidated campus. Workday had been occupying several buildings in the Pleasanton area that were within walking distance of each other, but weren't necessarily on the same parcel and what have you. So what we were able to do is, once again, create a consistent look and feel to their monumentation, which you'll see on the next slide. And having that really be kind of, for lack of a better term, the glue that really created what was really some distant buildings into more of a consolidated campus. So again, kind of consistency of signage, look and feel. So we had these monuments developed for each of the buildings so that they were easy to key in on and understand that they were Workday buildings. And then next. And then obviously, so Workday, the headquarters was anchored right next to the Pleasanton BART station. So there were a lot of things that we needed to consider from a wayfinding perspective. Again, reinforcing that experience of, how can we orient people to all of the varying buildings for Workday, but also kind of that transportation mode as well, all the different destinations, what have you. So next. Zoning and orientation. This is a really important aspect to a lot of our clients, especially clients that actually occupy very complex buildings, very complex environments. So getting into the work that we did for Lyft down in China Basin, probably some of the biggest floor plates we've worked on. But the idea being that the issue, they came to us and said, hey, listen, people are popping up in elevators, are really having a hard time understanding exactly where they are located within the building. So we actually built off of a program that they had developed. We kind of helped them kind of take it to the next level, the next stage, which was really anchored the floor plates both east and west with the ballpark, as well as the transit center on the other side of the building. And again, creating zones, and these zones were not only colored, but also numbered, and then bifurcating the zone plates with even and odd numbers. So the idea with when these are strategically located on these floor plates, people can pop up in elevators, they can key in on not only the map information, but also the floor information that also is sporadic throughout the entire. So the idea of being able to utilize different tools to help reinforce wayfinding. The other thing that's important about these things, as Kevin said, these environments, they can be changing a lot. So actually this vertical map right here, it's actually a magnetic material. So they can change these things out very cost effectively and very easily in a pretty quick turnaround time as well. And the floor graphics too are pretty well, they're cost effective, easy to change out, what have you. So next. Digital wayfinding is also something that we're, when asked and with the appropriate client, makes all the sense in the world. And so we've worked with LinkedIn for a lot of years to really kind of create static digital maps. We've created consistent look and feel. And again, I think so much about zoning and orientation is about kind of the simplification of the information. You don't have to communicate everything on a map, just what are the key destinations. Someone said at the beginning of the presentation, hey, it's not all just about getting you to conference room 7, but I think the idea here, with the potential of many of your buildings and facilities possibly morphing, changing a little bit, digital can be a great tool for you to manage that and provide the information that's really critical to visitors and your employees as well. So next. I think one of the other key aspects of what we bring to the table, and I kind of refer to it as fighting visual fatigue. And this idea of, Kevin had mentioned earlier, long gone are the days of just sticking your logo everywhere. So much about what we're doing in regards to, going back to that term, curating the experience, is it is about supporting the brand, but it can also be about supporting culture. And this was a project that we worked on with LiveRamp actually this last year in the middle of the pandemic. They had said, hey, listen, we have this thought about wanting to display images of our company, reinforcing our culture and who we are and what we stand for. So we worked with them to develop a series of displays. These are all magnetic hexes, so you can actually move and pull off and move around all of these elements. And so it's fully interchangeable, fully updatable. It can change out daily, weekly, monthly, however you want to manage it. And we, again, hook them up with a really good fab partner who can help them support this in a timely fashion. But just one way of being able to kind of, again, fight visual fatigue. This display will always be different. Graphics on walls, another great way of fighting visual fatigue, from the standpoint that a lot of bang for your buck in regards to, kind of custom wallpapers. And so we do a lot of this for our clients. And whether it's bringing in branded graphics or just a splash of color, this can do a lot for creating some vibrancy within an environment. And hey, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, if it wants to change out, it's easy to change out and fairly cost effective. So next. And telling stories, very much a part of what we bring to the table. In this particular case, Atlassian had asked us, hey, you guys got to tell the history of our company, and you got to do it on this particular wall, and dropped a 3-foot tall stack of papers on us. So we said, hey, you know what we're going to do? We're going to get creative here. We're going to actually inset into the wall this display case. We're going to quadruple the amount of space that you have, and we're going to create these tubes, and we're going to use all 4 sides of these tubes to be able to tell your story. So next. So one side, definitely, hey, skyline of Austin, Texas, which is where the headquarters was located. And then also getting into the ability to tell their history. And again, this is all vinyl graphics. It can change, it can update. this was back in 2016 or actually 2015. So each year they just apply the next year and what have you, and so on. So much of what we have to think about is the longevity of the things that we design for the built environment. And a lot of times that's designing flexibility into these sign systems or elements that tell important stories. Next.
All right, thanks, Dixon. I think that's the last slide for yours. So I'll just kind of wrap it up with some key takeaways before we kind of get into some Q&A time. But really, when you're implementing your next wayfinding and signage system, or you're looking to augment your current signage system with your return to office, the big thing, educate yourself to ensure you've got a seat at the table. Really understand user journeys and how those vary from different types of users. Identify your budgets early on to control costs, not only implementation costs, but future costs on the maintenance of those as well. Again, focus on the user experience. We can't emphasize this enough. Buildings aren't just made, but they're made to be experienced. So understanding how that experience adjusts, especially with that return to office experience as well, is critical. And then reinforcing employee health, safety, and wellness. Anytime you can do that is a great opportunity, especially with COVID. Certainly want employees to feel safe when they come back. And then figuring out how you can use your signage system to help influence employee behavior, guest behavior, what have you. And then doing what you can to build flexibility into your signage system so that it makes it easy for any updates in the future. And that way you're not having to replace a signage system every couple of years. You can really stretch that out and increase the life cycle of that. So, and with that, that is kind of the end of our presentation. I'll turn it back over to Joshua with for any kind of Q&A. You've got our contact information on there. If there's any other questions that pop up, feel free to reach out to us at any point. Happy to help you out. But Joshua, I'll turn that back over to you.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder, everybody, if you do have a question, please feel free and type them into the question box, and I'll be happy to present them to our speakers today. Someone out there is saying it's a great presentation with good info, and he actually would like to know if he can get a copy of the PowerPoint to share with his leadership team. Can they reach out and get a copy of that from you?
Absolutely. Yeah, just email kwilhelm@newgroup.com there, and I'd be happy to share that with you.
Great. And then someone else is asking, what are some IoT benefits in modern wayfinding technology?
It's an interesting and challenging question. There's a lot of technologies. It's constantly changing out there with the introduction of sensor systems. There's other digital wayfinding. Certainly, we've seen a lot of digital wayfinding that are touch screens. So there are concerns about that. Typically, what we do is we will build digital maybe into the program, but we do truly partner with a best-in-breed out there. I think some of the interesting technologies that are out there right now. I think you start seeing more people using mobile. I don't think anybody is truly leaving their house without some kind of smartphone on them. So there's the opportunity to be able to integrate that within there. Some of the digital wayfinding technologies out there tie into that and really using some near field communication to be able to address that. But I certainly would love to be able to talk a little bit more, but we do truly partner with a digital partner out there to be able to answer some of those questions.
And I think it's also important to say that, I had mentioned in the presentation that oftentimes for the right client, the right, solution, and it's really making sure that, we have a lot of people that come to, hey, we want to embrace, digital technology, what have you, but not to say we talk more people out of it than talk them into it, but you just have to be able to support it. And that's where kind of, third-party entities that can help support the systems can be really beneficial to our clients that want to embrace it. Hopefully that answered their question.
Great, thank you. Says, what is the first step for an FM who wants to convince leadership to upgrade the wayfinding system and conference room signs to something more modern?
Modern meaning digital technology, I guess would be our question back.
Yes.
I mean, I think
question.
the approach to that, one is, I think going through this is at least educating yourself in the process. I think the big thing you can do is, instead of coming and just saying, we want to do this, it's build a case study for that. So understanding, here's some technologies that you want to be able to implement. Here's the overall cost. Here's the cost benefit analysis that goes into that. I think the key is just it's being able to make a case for some of those things. We saw that a lot with LinkedIn, where they were having a challenge trying to get people to shift over to a sign standards program and implementing digital wayfinding in there. So we came alongside them and really helped really write a white paper of here's the case for why we should shift over to some sign standards and why we want to implement some digital components in there. So we kind of helped crafted that story for them. But I think that's the big thing. It's got to be based off of needs. You've got to understand what are some of the costs going into that as well. And just what's the overall benefit? I mean, just the fact that if you're shifting over some digital technologies, updating becomes a lot easier. But you also need to understand what's the life cycle of some of those digital components as well. I think the further along we get into, digital technologies, it gets smarter, it gets cheaper, it's going to become easier to maintain. I think we'll start seeing a lot more of that. But the key is really, I think, just building that case study.
Yeah, what's the value of your employees getting lost or confused and or doubling up on conference rooms? That can be a big duration of time over a year. So, and I'm sure you can quantify that, from a cost perspective.
Thank you. Data tracking for hybrid workplace is going to be critical. A JLL study said collecting that data is very important to FM. How can a digital wayfinding system support that?
It's a great question.
Can you repeat the question again?
Sure. Data tracking for hybrid workplace is going to be critical. The JLL study said collecting that data is very important to FM. How can a digital wayfinding system support that?
I think it's going to depend on that digital wayfinding system. Certainly, if it's more of a touch screen, type of a component, it's not going to be able to track individual users. I think if you're starting to, bring in a digital wayfinding system that is tied into mobile devices or IoT devices, then you're going to start getting a lot more of those metrics, based off of user profiles. But, the key is really understanding what are the technologies that are getting implemented with your return to office strategy or any digital wayfinding.
Yeah, how robust the system is.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of that overall audit process as well. Is yes, you need to take a look at your systems, your signage systems that you have in place. Yes, you need to take a look at what's the usage and circulation. But I think even taking a step back and understanding what are some of the other tools that are being used to control and manage that environment. How can you leverage some of those existing technologies and build that into your signage program?
Thank you. One more question. So, when returning to the office, what items are best to include in the welcome back packet / desk drop?
Yeah, well, certainly, at least the materials we've developed, it's, what are those changed behaviors? Where are locations for the items that can support those behaviors? Cleaning stations, what have you, for, workstations, what have you. Also, I know that with McAfee, one of the conversations I just had the other day, I was down at their headquarters, we were talking about the brochure, and the idea of when we were kind of beginning to develop that brochure pre-COVID, again, it had an area map of all the surrounding amenities to their headquarters. And one of the things that's really important in what has made this past year really hard is to ensure that all the amenities that maybe you had been planning for, that if they're not in your building or not on your campus, are they still around? So in other words, making sure that that you do your kind of due diligence, your homework, that kind of thing. So, and in the case of McAfee, this was going to be a new headquarters, so it was really kind of a map of the floor plates, orientation to the new campus that they were on, that kind of thing. So I think that hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah. Well, I think another component that you've really got to take into consideration, that communicating with your teams too, is what does your new hybrid workforce look like? It's not everybody 100% coming back. You may start working in different shifts. You may have shared spaces. You may have hoteling that's been implemented. So understanding how the workforce has shifted, how is that being addressed from a work from home versus working from the office? Are there key collaboration days? So that's going to be unique to every single company. So it's understanding, like Dixon said, change behaviors. What are the changes to the environment? But what is your company's overall approach to that return to office and that hybrid workforce? How is that getting implemented? And then what are some key communication channels? How can employees provide feedback on what's working and what's not? I think, as companies start bringing people back to the office, we've all got this theory about how it's going to work, and things may change once you start introducing people into a system. It's going to be a very dynamic environment. So having some of those feedback mechanisms in place, I think, will be critical.
Excellent. Okay, that was our last question. I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up. Dixon, Kevin, I want to thank you very much for an informative webinar. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Thank you, everybody.